Ladies and gentlemen, MBTI enthusiasts, typology experts, recovering DiSC and StrengthsFinders profilers, thanks for being here today. I am joined graciously on the show today by Lindsay Johnson. Lindsay Johnson is the co-founder and CEO of Snug.me and the wildly popular YouTube personality known as LiJo. So Lindsay, LiJo, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. This is cool.
This is awesome. Yes, I've actually been a fan for a long time of your YouTube channel, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But I kind of want to talk about your business that you're running right now. You know, starting Snug. Do you say Snug or do you say the whole thing?
It's Snug. I'll distinguish it with Snug.me online because there is a company that does phone cases named Snug, but we are Snug, and the URL is Snug.me. But I say
okay.
Snug.
So I'm curious. So what did you notice about the current way things were being done that inspired you to create Snug? Because obviously we're both INTJs, so it's like something must have been inefficient. We had to you have to seek that out and then snuff all that inefficiency out. So what were you seeing in your market that compelled you to start Snug?
Yes, there was really two main factors. I think on one side, I was kind of compiling some information that I knew wasn't finished yet. I knew it was kind of waiting for a piece, and I knew typology and what I was learning through it would be a piece of that. And I didn't know what it was yet, but I was like, there's something in there. I'm waiting for this file in the back here is waiting for something. So that was kind of on the back burner, right? And then there was the piece where I had people who wanted to talk to me through my YouTube channel. And I had seen other people offer services to, like conversational services to speak to people, talk about their, their type, things that they're trying to solve. And I was like, well, that would be great. And so I was like, well, okay, so I need something that does a few things. I need something that has a calendar where I can have sessions on it, that has payments and video all integrated on one thing, because in my mind, I was like, I don't want to be sending a separate link with another thing, and then here's a payment link, and then someone's going to have trouble downloading Zoom. And in my mind, I was like, gosh, I will do anything not to do that. Because when you're scaling something and you have a volume coming in, it's like, I don't have time for more emails and more all of this. So I looked for it and it didn't exist anywhere. And I was like, oh, that's weird. You would think that it would. And then as I was starting to think more about this, and as I was learning more about type, I really started to get into the FE function. That was kind of what led me to type. And the more I was beginning to understand about it and really seeing the value of person-to-person interaction and person-to-person contact, and also seeing how that value is going to be so increased in the future because of automation and how, the world is progressing and moving. And it's like, well, okay, what's going to be most valuable? It's going to be the actual person-to-person interaction. And so in a summary, all of that together is what made Snug become a thing. And I was so lucky to be able to actually, use the beta testing and everything from the very beginning with my own audience, which was great, and could see everything working, and we worked out in the kinks in the beginning, and now it just continues to grow. So
yeah, can you explain for the audience, because some people are on various levels of MBTI understanding, so when you say use an FE function, can you elaborate on that and the easiest, explain like the audience is 5?
Sure. So FE, extroverted feeling, seeing the spectrum of value, seeing the spectrum of human value is where I would like to kind of put it. And I come from the extroverted thinking side, the TE, and TE is much more about solving, figuring out, if someone comes to us with a problem, we're like, well, how do we fix it? That's the first thing we want to look at. We're not looking at how do I become human in this moment to meet this person where they're at. So that was a big thing that I'm still working on till this day. But I really saw how that fit in with the model of Snug, because it gives people a space to be able to do that with people who have similar interests. So.
Gotcha. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, that's talking about the FE function with INTJs is like a very MBTI kind of like master's level course. So I just want to lay that out.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is interesting. You talk about people wanting to contact you through your YouTube channel, and that's how I found you, and that's how I contacted you. So, like I said, I've been a subscriber for a long time. I enjoy like the progression because it seems like recently you've done more skits, which is kind of funny, and I can tell like the quality, and just you must spend a ton of time editing and just figuring out like how to have better insights for all the functions, and then more creative things for the INTJ. But all that being said, I use your own software to book you, which is great.
Yeah.
So this is interesting. So you charge $5 for a business inquiry, and that's super bold. And I was like, wow, okay, but I'm going to do it because, what's $5? So tell us about how you came up with this model is going to work for charging for just an inquiry. And let me ask you this, is on the side. Do you ever not respond when someone pays you?
Well, I'll always send them some sort of a response.
Right.
The volume at which it is, it depends. And actually so I kind of came with the integration of the video, that whole component. My business partner, the co-founder, he's the one who really wanted to implement business inquiries, because what he saw was that YouTube actually, if you're signed in with a Google address, you can only access 5 people's business inquiries per day from different YouTube channels. So this was just implemented like 6 months ago.
Oh, wow.
So if you were trying to get some emails from people or, talk to multiple people and get email addresses, you can only get 5 and you're blocked out. So he was like, well, this will be a good way to have this on the platform so people can always access. But if the person wants, they could put a paywall in front of it. And what I think this is particularly suited for is there's a lot of people's channels or just businesses in general that they are getting a lot of emailed questions and they're spending a lot of time responding to these people. Some of the people who I communicate with in the typology world, it's like, they're getting like 15, 20 emails a day of people with like real problems, real things that need to be addressed. And they're spending hours responding to these. So you could have your business inquiry be free, or you could put a payment on it basically to get a written message in return.
And I think it's just like, if people just want to like send you spam or like criticize you, they're going to have to pay $5 to do it. So I totally get that. And they have to have some buy-in too. I think there is a lot of well, you do YouTube for free, so can you give me more free advice? It's like, well, no, I have a life and business and stuff like that. So it's appreciated. I just thought that's pretty bold. I wonder how has that been received? Do a lot of people inquire?
I would say I get really quality inquiries. Sometimes I get questions, but more so I do get business related stuff. Like I was actually contacted for a documentary that I'm going to be on coming out like February or something like that through business inquiries. And so, would they have gotten me through the other way? Like possibly, but it's interesting. I've been getting a higher quality of inquiry coming in through there. So
that's awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah. So I want to switch just a little bit. So you're an INTJ, that's what your channel's about, and some other things, but I want you to possibly give some advice, because I talk to a lot of people through LinkedIn, a lot of NT types, ENTJ females, INTJ females, and there seems to be like, more of this fish out of water in the corporate world, which you understand. And is there any advice that you could impart, life advice or corporate workplace advice, like, the INTJ female that's like just coming out of college and about to go into the corporate world? Is there any advice you could give?
So I would say, that we have a really interesting dynamic, I think, of those of us who have TE over FI. So that extroverted thinking. Now, for myself, introverted intuition, it drives the bus. I can't steer, it steers the ship, everyone wanting to or not, doesn't matter. TE and FI, they're in that second and third place. And then, for the ENTJs, they have that TE first. But what I found is that, if you going through college or working a regular job, your TE is in a great position because you're working for a team, you're working with people, you're delivering on something that is for the collective, right? And so it's easy to figure out what works best, whatever. When you start to go down a more entrepreneurial route, when you're doing something that's your own idea, your own dream, you're putting something of yours that's personal to you on the line, you're kind of bringing that FI out more, right? Even if you're NITE, you have worked to craft it perfectly, that FI, that like inner part of you is like, you're like, wow, this is so exposing, because instead of doing this for the collective, I'm having to bring out this inner piece of myself that's personal to me. And so that was really, in the beginning, kind of hard, because, you know, I had to get people on board with this project who were in it for equity. You know, I'm not paying them. And so it's like, I have to get someone to buy in to my little baby idea and actually, you know, like, and I felt in the beginning, I was like, why would anyone, you know, want to do this? I know it's a good idea, but it's just like, it just felt so strange to put it out there. So in the beginning, I think I actually went a bit slower because it was so intimidating to put something so personal out there and try to get people on board with it. And I'm used to doing everything myself and just doing the whole thing myself. And so, you know, but you kind of start to like put things out there, get past that, and then realize that like, oh, okay, people buy into this. Okay. Like it's, you know, you think it's a good idea. It's like other people think it is a good idea too. And so starting to make it that FI portion, you know, being like, this isn't only my special idea. This is an idea that I'm putting out there. And, you know, what happens. And, you know, if it tanks, it tanks. If it doesn't, you know, and so it's starting to depersonalize it in order to really push it and accelerate it forward was important.
Did you ever have any trouble communicating your grandiose ideas? When
I had started with it, I had distilled it so much at that point. I had really narrowed down my language to be like, it's this, and this. It combines it. This is what it's for. That's it.
Gotcha.
But that had been like, the thing is like the idea itself had really been marinating in there for years of like something that I was trying to work out to build. And so a few years ago, it would have been nothing like that, you know? So I think the time really helped.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, that's, and then the other thing that tend to notice just from NT types in general, or NT females in general, is that the like being viewed as too logical or too masculine. Did that ever come across where it's like intimidating, or like your boss thinks that you might be smarter than him or her? It's like, did that ever come across?
Okay, so like in the corporate world before I did more of the entrepreneurial stuff, I think that I was lucky in the fact that both of my like big kid job bosses both had TE as dominant functions. And so because of that, they really appreciated when I spoke in TE and kind of just like, you know, got the other shit out of the way. And I was just like, you know, this isn't going to work. You know, Michael, my first boss, I was like, Michael, I see this is all happening. It's not going to work. We have to do it this way. It's the only way it's going to work. And he's just like, you're right. Thank you so much. And like, he appreciated that. Now, if I was working like in that capacity with someone of a very different type who maybe had, you know, like TI or FI, like in a saver position, like it might not have gone as smoothly.
Sure. Yeah.
And that definitely had been the case with more, you know, social interactions and things like that. But I was very lucky in that my bosses all actually had TE. So. Gotcha.
And that tends to be the top of corporations just statistically have TE in the top two functions. So I guess direct boss probably more the colleagues would be where the issues might erupt.
Yeah, more. that would be a little bit different. You know, I think I call it like my first big girl job, right? I was the youngest manager by about 20 years. And so I was with a lot of people who had been with the business for many years. They had a lot of seniority, whatever. And then I come in, this, you know, younger kid, and asserting my area that I know about. And I think in the beginning that was both intimidating to people who had been there for a while and who are older, and then also a little bit abrupt because, and I try to get better at this, but I'm not really good at like the pleasantries in email, in conversation. I'm not going, it's like, if I'm sending an email, it's like, here's the one line, here's the one thing you need to know, email signature, that's it, right? And then I started to realize, I'm like, wow, other people, like, they ask how your day was, they do this and that. And I was like, I wonder if that's why some of my interactions have been a little bit stranger.
Yes.
And so I tried to, you know, take some mental notes on what people do, how they interact. And I think once people, knew who I was, and they knew that I wasn't trying to, push them out of the way, or I'm not trying to micromanage anyone. Like, I'm not interested. Then they were like, okay, she's all right. But in the beginning, I think it's a little.
So the email thing's funny because what I do is I'll type the message out and then I'll go back and add hello, comma, and like, you have warm regards. But normally it would just be the message, send, no, hardly any grammar check sometimes. But it's funny because it's like, oh yeah, I should say good afternoon, person.
Yes.
And then, so that's like a thing that as INTJs, that's I didn't have till I was like, I'm 30 now, but probably till I was like 28. I was like, I got to start doing this. So it's like the type development took a while. And it's like, well, don't people just respect direct? It's like, no, they want tact, and tactfulness is as kind of what you're describing, is being more tactful about things. So I love that. So let me ask you this. There is a big school of thought in kind of HR and organizational development now, the OD world, so MBTI's played out, and it's MBTI'd out. Like, everyone got certified was like 1997. So it's like, they're not really into it anymore. Every corporation seems to be moving towards this emotional intelligence, EQI model as like, this is the best way to assess talent. Like, we got to make sure they're emotionally intelligent, and then we can just teach them anything. Do you believe that is, I'm biased towards MBTI. Like, you can find emotional intelligence within the whole like dynamics of it.
Right.
How do you think like we can bridge that gap? Do you think MBTI is still relevant, or do you think the emotional intelligence way of assessing people is the proper way to go about assessing talent?
That's really interesting. I would say that I still fall into the typology realm, because the thing is it gives you a greater picture of the person as a whole versus just how well they score on emotional intelligence, And so the thing is, but on the flip side, it's like, what I really think, like, if people are using typology in order to grow their lesser functions, and they're saying, okay, here's this person's strengths, right? Their MBTI, right? Here's the areas that might be harder for them. Like, that's how we learn to bridge the gap versus just being like, this person scores this level on emotional intelligence, whatever. And so I really like the holistic approach to typology, and that, like, here's your starting point. Now here's your growing areas. And when it's applied that way, I think it's the better tool.
Right. And I think that's kind of the disservice between the like corporate entity that is MBTI, where it's kind of like, it's easy to attack that and say like, well, the whole facets and step 1, step 2 and all that part about it doesn't really get into like the huge part of like the archetypes and like the 8 function model and the type development, and like how there are little, like, if you want to develop FE better, like, you can literally do these 3 things tomorrow. And then if you want to go a little bit more advanced, you do these things. And there is a path. So when I was, I interviewed Dara Nardi a couple days ago, and he was talking about how like DiSC and things like StrengthsFinders like don't actually have a type development path, which I don't think emotional intelligence does either, like this EQI assessment. So do you agree that like that's where it kind of separates itself, because you can actually develop it in an actionable way?
Yeah, 100%. And, and I think as the MBTI community, like, there's definitely people who do embrace that path, and push it forward. And I think the more that the community does that as a whole, the better it's going to grow to. And the thing is like, I'm not versed in like the corporate MBTI structure. Like, that would be, your area. And so it's like, I don't know if someone, so FE obviously was like my biggest issue, right? And so if I had taken the MBTI test like through my business, would they have been like, hey, FE is the area you suck at, this is what you need to work at? Or would it have just been like, this is who you are? Yeah.
And I feel like that's most people's criticism is like, yeah, we had some practitioner come in and they just kind of like threw out this piece of paper and said, you're an ENTJ commander. And then there's like, have fun. And then they're like, well, that's a horrible experience. And I think I would consider you and I and other people that I met like the new guard versus the old guard. It's like, we're trying to make it, sexy again. It really is. And there's a lot to it. It's just kind of, I think, become a little bit too corporatized and templated, but it's not custom to each person. So I think we're on the same page there. I think emotional intelligence is encapsulated within MBTI. It's just harder to find with the normal method. Do you ever go on like personality database and just kind of look at like all the community driven?
I have, yeah, a few times.
Okay. So do you know what you are on there?
I'm an ESFP.
Okay, so is that just like a massive troll campaign to like screw you over? Because like there's probably no way that you would fit that. So what do you say to people? So she's not an INTJ, she's ESFP.
Well, there's a few particular people in the community who I think have some dominion over that area, who I have apparently personally offended. And so, and let things fall as they will. The thing is like, I'm going to have my trajectory, and then everyone else can have their playground on the internet. And so, I think it's funny, and it's like, some of the comments that I had gotten in the past, like, and I realized that I'm like, these are 14-year-old kids in their parents' basement. Like, like, why do I care? But it's like, I'll get comments like, oh, like, she's too pretty to be an INTJ, or, she, oh gosh, what was it? Like, oh, she doesn't look at the camera enough. Oh, she looks at the camera not enough. Or like things like this, like very affect related versus content related. And for me, that's kind of the defining factor. I'm like, okay, if you want to look at the affect and not the content, I can't really help you there. It's like you have to draw your own conclusions through the information versus through what you're physically looking at. So,
I mean, there's plenty of great looking INTJs. I mean, come on.
Again, 14-year-old kids in their parents' basement.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay, so I assume something like that was going on. How do you like to type people? Like me, for example, when I listen to them talk, I like to hear if they're like saying things like, if you ask them for advice, the first thing they do, if they're a TE user, is say like, you should, or what you should do is like instantly just tell you what you should do. And then there's other types that are like more like, well, maybe you can consider this, or what I think the best option would be is this. And they're very, I try to be like, okay, that's probably a TE. So they're like these, they could possibly be these 4 types. How do you look at it? I always look at speech patterns. Is there something else that you use?
Well, the first thing I try to filter out is how much they know about the typology community. Because like if they know a lot about it, like the first 20 minutes is usually bullshit. So, if they're in the mentality of they want to be a certain type. So if that's the case, I try to get them talking as much as they can to start turning off that kind of like subconscious brain, or that conscious brain, to let the subconscious come out. So if there's someone who really hasn't been in type at all, they're fresh, what they're talking is really, truly unrehearsed. Then what I like to get at first is really asking them what their week is like. And so I start to get an idea for, are they in pattern or are they out of pattern with their daily habits? And really starting to make that differentiation of how structured this person's life is. And that's kind of like the first thing I start to look at. It's kind of like that P versus J side. And then I start to kind of go more into, where is this person, like, where is the greatest part of contention for this person? What is their greatest struggle? What is the thing at the end of the day that like is really getting them in the side, and get them starting to talk about that? Because that's when you'll start to see those spikes in emotion. You'll start to see the anger. You'll start to see kind of the spectrum of what their frustrations are. And I feel like that's really the root in typing, is getting at where the real heart of the frustration is. So I'm a little rough on people sometimes, but I get out that good information.
So you're typing through like either the inferior, like what makes them upset or what they get really like butthurt about sometimes or emotional. And then, or you're looking like what their trickster like 7th is, like how you would look at yours. Is that what you're trying to like reverse?
Well, I'll hear the language of the dominant 4 functions. Like that's one thing that, you'll kind of hear throughout the whole thing. So like, I'll be listening for the language, but then it's like, you could be speaking the language of NI and SC, right? But you have to know where the spike of frustration is coming from. Is it coming from making the guesses and seeing the patterns? Knowing what's coming up, being scared about the abstract, right? So having NI like in a 3rd or 4th position, or is it the frustration of like the things in the real world, And so and I'm always looking for the coin too. So I'm always like, okay, well, if I'm hearing Savior NI, right, or if I'm hearing Savior SE, I should be hearing the frustration coming from NI. And so I'm always kind of balancing those two parts.
Gotcha. Okay. It's always interesting to work with people that have NI as a top or second function, because when you tell them, like, do you ever just have ideas and you can't explain, or you don't know where they came from? I feel like that's a really fun one to describe. But in terms of how you see it, it's an interesting point you make, like, because it's nonverbal, it's passive. So how do you see someone that's got NI? Is it they ponder? Because that sounds like an NE thing. So explain to me how you figure out the NI part.
So NI for me is, once I really discovered what I was doing, that was NI, and I found out, I was like, oh, that's what it is. That thing that I literally do all the time. I had no idea that's what it was until I really dug in to figure out what it was. And now it's like, okay, now that language is pretty easy for me to hear from anyone, because it's really about how they're pulling in their idea. So I feel like people with NE so there's abstract talk, right? You're not talking about the literal things. You're talking about the ideas, the concepts, the theories, right? And that speech can either be going outwards, NE, and NE is like a tree. So it's like, oh, here's this idea, and then I'm going to go over here, and then I'm going to go over here, and then we're going to talk about this. And I'm like, well, where was the root? Like, where do we start at this, right? Mm-hmm. And then NI is more like it's on like the branches outward, and then it's coming in down to get the actual point. And so through the pattern of the person's speech, you'll be able to see and hear, are they going outward or are they going inward? And that's really how I see NI work.
Yeah, and I think I read a book recently by AJ Drenth. He has a lot of books, and he talked about NI being a convergent versus NE being divergent. So like NI is like, there's all these data points, and they just condense it down or distill it down, like you mentioned earlier, where NE is like, no, it's kind of directionless, but it's just like branching out. So that's really interesting to think about like that. So where do people find you? Are you mostly, are you 17, 18? How many thousand subscribers do you have right now?
I think I'm 18 right now. Somewhere in there.
Is that where most people find you? I mean, I didn't know you had this whole other business, Snug. That's awesome. So where do most people find you? Are you looking to grow the YouTube channel and Snug at the same time, or they kind of converge together where you're going to find the influencers through YouTube and then convert them to Snug? How does that work?
Yeah. So, Snug is really it's a personal monetization platform. So it's really, we kind of started with the YouTube market, but it's going to be expanding far beyond there. Snug is, people can always find me there. They can type in my YouTube channel name and it'll pull me up, but they can also go to my YouTube channel and pull up my information there. That'll lead them to Snug. But, so people can always find me on YouTube. And then in terms of Snug, it's really for anyone who has any kind of audience where they want to scale interactions with people and be able to monetize that and connect with people. And so, if people want to do that, they can go directly to snug.me, and then they can sign up, and we approve everyone who goes on the platform, and then, they can make all their stuff that day. And then, for me, I'm going to be continuing to make YouTube content, and YouTube is something I'm always going to continue to do in the background, like as I grow the business, as everything, because it's like, aside from, the value of like working and like creating an audience, it's like, I feel like I know these people so well at this point. And so, I call them my internet friends, which they really are, because there's some people in there who I'm like, oh my gosh, like I've been reading your comments for like 2 years now, and so.
I do appreciate that you read comments and like them, because it definitely adds like a friendly touch to it, where it's like, yeah, you can like or love everything, but if you actually comment back on them, it's like, okay, this person's engaged in their own stuff. So that is interesting. So in terms of the different types of content, and I do the same thing, because I mostly live on LinkedIn and I post stuff there and infographics and things like that. You've done lives, you've done the skits, you've done just the straight up like top 5 ways that you can tell an INTJ likes you or doesn't like you. What type of content do you feel like gets the most interaction? Is it your live stuff? Is it your skit stuff? Or is it just strict, niche INTJ stuff?
I think I had to start with the INTJ stuff specifically because I had to kind of claim some groundwork in the community as a whole. And so that's how I started to do that, was specifically through my personality. And then at that point, it was like I got to a place where I had to incorporate other types into my content. And so I started doing that with like talking and teaching about different functions, talking about, IPs versus IJs and, that kind of dynamic. What I really wanted to do is like, I need to make this, so like the FE that I'm trying to grow in the back of my head is like, you need to make this entertaining, right? And then I'm like, I don't know, I'm not like an entertainer. I'm like, the most important thing to me is teaching the understandings, right? For people to like, be like, I watched that video and I understood that one thing better, and now I can apply that tool to my real life, right? And so I'm like, well, how do I sneak that in there? Like, how do I sneak it in and make it entertaining so that people want to watch it and they engage with it and they actually pay attention, and then they walk away with a tool they didn't know that they needed, right? And so that's my goal all the time. And, sometimes the teaching videos do that better, but probably most people know Frank James on YouTube, right?
Of course.
The biggest one out there, right? And so he did the whole 16 personalities, acting as each one. I was never comfortable with that because I was like, I don't feel like I can personify an INFP, let's say. Like,
it's hard.
To me, I was like, there's just way too much going on there. Like, I just didn't feel like I could give that type justice, right? I'm not an actress, right? But I was like, when I started looking at the functions, I was like, oh, I can be a thing. I could be a function. It's not a real person. I can act like the thing acts, right? And so I saw that as my method to create understanding with the functions themselves. And I could teach the functions in a way that people could begin to understand them at a different level.
I really like I think the last one I really connected with is a couple of videos back. It was like all the functions flirting or getting complimented at a bar or something. And like some of them were just so funny because it's like, that's actually a deeper understanding. Like I love Frank James. He's like inspired me to like start doing stuff like this is so great. Yeah. But then going into like how the functions at a party, or I think you have one where it's like showing up to a party and like the NI one's hilarious and like the SI one's really funny too. And it's just like, that's a better way in my mind of like going a little bit deeper where it's like, this manifests in itself in a scenario. Whereas sometimes like he gets the INTJ wrong. It's like, that's not what we'd say, man. But it's like, it's funny because it's like, it's challenging. And then that's how you get engagement and things like that. But I do like the manifestation of each function in a specific scenario because it's like, oh, well, that explains why that person at parties is the wallflower.
Yeah. And I think it's also like such a cool tool for like, okay, like let's say, okay, so like the cognitive functions flirting, right? Is like, okay, so it's like if you're trying to work on FE, right? Like FE is one of like the better ones in the situation, right? And it's like, okay, you're some person and you're like, man, like I'm not good in this situation. And you watch the video and you're like, man, FE really nails it. Maybe I need to learn more about this function in order to be better in this situation. And so that's kind of, where I've seen it, like I have to apply it to my own understanding first, right? In order to write the scripts. And so it's helping me, and then hopefully it's helping other people.
Great way to think about it. I never thought that, but yeah, I guess people would be like, that's a really like the FE flirting technique or receiving flirting is like that's positive. And that's how I want to be. So that's really interesting. So who would you say historically or now is like the personification of an INTJ all time, dead or alive?
I should have like a better answer for this question because it's definitely been asked to me a few times. Okay, well, I'll have to give you, so I'm not someone who really watches movies or sees anything that people really know about, so I don't really have good pop culture references. But one person who I do know that's an INTJ, and I think that you can really see it within their writing, especially, is James Clear. He's the writer of Atomic Habits. And so
I have read that, yes.
Yeah. And so, if you're looking for like a an epitome of like an INTJ in terms of like how the mind works, how we kind of frame conclusions, how we get to an endpoint. James Clear really, through his writing, really like flushes it out really well. And, he's not going to be like a cool like Sherlock Holmes reference, but I think that if someone who's really interested in diving into the type more and actually getting some benefit from the type, that he's a great person to, learn and read about.
Okay, I read that like a couple months back. I was underwhelmed by the book, but I didn't really look at his writing style in terms of like whether or not he was an INTJ. But I feel like across the board, anyone that writes self-help or getting organized is a TE user. So it's like, it's probably going to be that kind of person that's going to be like, here's how you get your shit together person. Classic example in today's world would be Elon. He just seems like the type of person that exemplifies that in a way that's like, he's got ideas, and some of them are like, we're going to colonize Mars, which is like a conceptual thing that's like, how are we going to do it? And then he's got like, here's how we're going to do it. But it's way far in the future. It's huge brained, but like some of he's not a great speaker sometimes. And I think that's a sign of like a brilliant INTJ. And then he has a terrible irony. He's such a great troll, but he's also the worst. Like he's like, in one interview, he's like, I got to remember people don't get irony. So he makes jokes that's like a terrible use of FE. And he thinks everyone's going to get it. He's like, this is going to kill it. This tweet I'm about to do is just going to nail and then he's like harassed and just like, I can't believe you said that. And he's like, what? That was funny.
Yeah.
Do you agree? Or
yeah, I mean, I think that's just like T problems in general. Like you get it to TE or TI users, honestly, it's like, we're just out of touch on the emotional spectrum and what's well received, I think, very often. And so because we're not tuning into that emotional like value side, we're like, oh yeah, this makes sense to me. I think this is hilarious. It would make sense that this thing and this thing would like create this reaction, right? And looking at it in a very logical, programmatic progression. Right. And it's like, we're not considering the human element that's related to that. And so I think that's, why things kind of come off from us sometimes. Like, I mean, I can like hit a good dad joke there every like once in a while, but like in general, sometimes I'll be good with sarcasm if people are on that same wavelength, but other times it's just like.
Yeah. And then you have to backpedal and have to apologize. I get that. Like, or explain your jokes.
Oh God, that's even worse.
Last thing I'll ask, and this is just kind of random as you were talking. I have noticed that my immediate friends group, from high school to college to adulthood has shrunk. And then I've actually typed everyone and they're all NTJ types. And I wonder if that's the same thing that you've experienced where you tend to just consolidate the people around you and they tend to be like thinking types, NT types that tend to be on the same wavelength, like you just mentioned. Have you done any of discovery like that?
Yeah. So, through like college, the friends who I picked up there, and, like a bit after, most of them ended up being, for the most part, NTPs and NFPs. I didn't have a lot of J friends.
Wow.
But that tended to be like, mostly NTPs and NFPs. And, it's always a joke, like the NFPs, like the ENFPs, INFPs, like they find you and then like they adopt you and they're like, you're coming this way. And you're like, all right. But so that's kind of who I tended to know better. And, since starting the business and whatever, it's like I see people, far less than I ever have before. But my business partner is actually an ISTP. And so I had never worked with an STP before, ever. Like in a very close working dynamic. And so in the beginning, I was so fascinated because I was like, I've never really met people who think like you do. And so I was just doing so much research, like trying to understand like this TI SE dynamic so much. And then until the point where it's like, I really ended up kind of getting it, understanding. And, but yeah, it's nice to work with someone who takes the sensory seriously.
Yes. That is great. And so it's like you have an idea and you know exactly how it's going to work. And then you pass it to the ISTP that will tinker with like, this is how we're going to make it happen. Like put the infrastructure in place and make it actually work. And I think I've met an INTP, ISTP partnership, and the INTP had the idea of the framework of how this is going to work, but the ISTP implemented it. Like, here's how we're going to technically do it all. Yeah. And I was like, that's a perfect person to have on your team. For an NT type, it's like we need the STP there. How's the kind of the meme of that is just the communication is very short and terse. Is that it's like a lot of grunts and like, yeah, okay, thanks, got it.
Yeah, definitely. And it's cool though having two sides of the thinking, like having TI and TE work together, because we really see the logic from two different sides. And I think that's a really good combination as well, that I don't think a lot of people talk about, having the TI version and the TE version, because we're really getting through all of like the issues that could, come across in a certain way. And also they're just, one thing I don't think people talk about enough is that the people who have sensory as a top in the top two functions is they're so fast. Like they are fast in reality, in the real world. Like when they're like, okay, this is what we have to do. And it's like, boom, 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 boom. And I'm like over here, I'm like, am I the slowest person that's ever walked the planet? Like, am I a sloth right now? Because that's how I feel compared to savior sensory. And because I had never worked with someone in close, proximity who was savior sensory, I had never known how slow I felt until now.
Wow, that is cool. I kind of want to advocate for like cognitive diversity in like the workplace or like in the environment. I have found that ENTPs are like a perfect, because it's the shadow side of the INTJ, as you know. So like having a well-developed ENTP on your team or as a friend tends to be like, they do all the things really well that you do terribly. So it's like, this is like, if I was going to put a team together, I would have like, a well-developed INTJ, well-developed ENTP, like have the shadow functions going perfectly well, that yin yang effect. That's just like, of course it's utopian idealism, but I think it would work. How do you, what would be, okay, this is another question. I know you're busy, but I just have to ask it now that it's rambling out of me. If you could put together like a team of 4, any project, I'm not going to put it in a sector. What 4 types would you have?
I would have, so I have to put myself in there. So I have an INTJ. I would have an ENFJ. I would have an ISTP, and then I would have, probably an ENTP.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is the ENFJ there for just like harmony purposes?
Well, I think the ENFJ is like, I think if it's a business type thing, right? FE is important. And I think that's one thing I end up, realizing more and more. And, studying some of the business owners who have like really made unique strides and like really massive strides in the business world, a lot of them have FE. And it's like, I think we always think, oh, like TE, but it's like, you look at the people who are winning on the human spectrum, on like everyone in their business being so happy that it propels the business to like a new place. And I'm like, dang, like that is really an important function. So I would want someone to hold the rest of the team accountable to, are we paying attention to the human spectrum enough?
Yes, so good. And they're very good for like corporate messaging, like having a PR would be a good person for, it's like, well, we don't want to have this TE approach. We want an FE approach to like bring people in. So now the last question would be, who's leading this project?
I would say like the INTJ and the ENFJ would play 2 different roles. I would see the ENFJ playing the more people-facing role, and the more like communicative role, like what you're saying, like the messaging. If someone has to go and address the audience in a way that comes off as warm and welcoming, let's let the ENFJ do that. They're going to be the best. I would see the INTJ running things more from the process-oriented side, the strategy side, and being like, okay, this is how we're going to get all these things to come together, and then having everyone else kind of playing a part in that. So I always see us as the behind the scenes kind of leader, because that's really where we shine the best.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you being here. I know that you're super busy, and I appreciate the time. I even feel like maybe I could have paid you $10. That's how much value I got out of this. So I'm it's good to finally met you. I was kind of a fangirl going into this thing. So
Cool.
I appreciate all your content, both, on the skits that you're doing. I really like that. I like the graphics, things like that. Is there anything else that you wanted to let my audience know about where to find you, or just any parting words?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube under LiJo, and then you can also check out snug.me. And if you're looking to, monetize in a way that relates to, interactions and efficiency, that's a great place to do it. So.
Perfect. Well, Lindsay, LiJo, thanks so much for being here. And I will be posting your links to find you in the comments and things like that. So there will be no way that people cannot connect with you. So appreciate y'all being here, and talk to you guys soon.
Cool. Thanks.